I dropped to my knees mid-asthma attack, clawing for air while my younger sister held my rescue inhaler. She smirked. Gasped, "Loser." My parents watched. And did nothing. Today, in court, when the judge said, "Before we begin, let's watch a family video," she trembled and started screaming. My lungs burned like someone had filled them with glass shards and lit a match. The world tilted sideways as I collapsed onto the hardwood floor of our dining room, my hands clutching at my chest as I tried desperately to force air into my constricted airways. Through blurring vision, I could see Taylor standing 3 feet away, dangling my rescue inhaler between her thumb and index finger like a toy she'd stolen from a child. "Gasp, loser," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. My parents sat at the table, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. Dad looked down at his plate. Mom sipped her wine. Neither moved. That was 12 years ago. I was 17. Taylor was 14. The memory still makes my chest tighten, though I haven't needed an inhaler in years. Funny how the body remembers trauma even after it heals. Growing up, I thought every family had a scapegoat. Mine just happened to be me. Taylor could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. When she broke my art project the night before it was due, Mom said I should have kept it somewhere safer. When she told her entire middle school that I'd wet the bed until I was 12, Dad laughed and called it typical sibling teasing. The bedwetting thing wasn't even true, but the damage was done. But the inhaler incident crossed a line I didn't know existed until that moment. I'd been diagnosed with asthma when I was 7. Mild, mostly exercise-induced, controllable with medication. My rescue inhaler stayed in my backpack during the school year and on my nightstand at home. That particular evening, I just finished a run. Cross-country was the one thing I was good at, the one place where my body didn't betray me if I managed my condition properly. Taylor had been watching from the porch as I came up the driveway, doubled over and wheezing. She'd gone inside ahead of me. By the time I made it to my room, my inhaler was gone. I tore apart my nightstand, my backpack, my desk drawers. My chest grew tighter with each passing second. Panic made everything worse. I stumbled downstairs, gasping out Taylor's name. She emerged from the kitchen, twirling my inhaler around her finger. "Looking for this?" "Give it," I wheezed, reaching out. She stepped back, grinning. "What's the magic word?" I couldn't speak anymore. My vision darkened at the edges. I dropped to my knees, clawing at the air between us. Mom and Dad walked in from the living room. They saw me on the floor. They saw Taylor holding the inhaler. "Taylor, honey, give your sister her medicine," Mom said, her tone suggesting she'd just asked Taylor to pass the salt. Taylor tossed it onto the floor, several feet away from me. I crawled toward it, my fingers finally closing around the plastic. 2 puffs. The relief wasn't immediate, but eventually my airways opened enough for me to breathe. "You're so dramatic," Taylor said, stepping over me to get to the dining room. Dad helped me to my feet with one hand, checking his watch with the other. "Dinner's getting cold." I ate in my room that night. And the next night. And the next. 3 months later, I left for college on a full scholarship. I called home once a month out of obligation. I came back for Thanksgiving and Christmas, sleeping in my childhood bedroom that Mom had already started converting into a craft room. Taylor had moved into the master suite on the 3rd floor, the one with the balcony and attached bathroom. "She needs the space," Mom explained. "You're barely here anymore." I graduated with honors, got a job at a consulting firm in Boston, and built a life that didn't include weekly family dinners or holiday guilt trips. My contact with them dwindled to occasional text messages and a card on birthdays. I was 23, finally breathing freely in every sense of the word. Then, 6 years after the inhaler incident, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this the younger sister of Taylor Hayes?" A woman's voice asked. "Speaking. This is Dr. Patricia Sullivan from Mercy General Hospital. Your sister Taylor was brought in an hour ago. She's asking for you." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "She was in a car accident. Non-life-threatening injuries, but she's pretty shaken up. Your parents are out of the country, according to her emergency contacts." I made the 3-hour drive in 2.5. Despite everything, she was still my sister. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Taylor lay in the bed, her left leg in a cast, bandages wrapped around her ribs. "Ronnie," she whispered when she saw me. Nobody had called me that since high school. "I'm here." I took her hand. She cried. Apologized. Told me she'd been a terrible sister, that she was young and stupid and desperate for our parents' attention. The words sounded rehearsed, but her tears seemed real. I wanted to believe her. Over the next 2 months, I drove down every weekend to help with her recovery. We watched movies. Ordered takeout. Talked about things we'd never discussed before. She told me she'd always been jealous of how smart I was, how easily things came to me. I told her about the loneliness of those college years, how I'd felt like an orphan with living parents. "We can be better," she said one Sunday afternoon, her head resting on my shoulder. "Start over." I believed her. 8 months later, she called with exciting news. She'd gotten engaged to her boyfriend, Ethan, a software engineer she'd been dating for 2 years. Would I be her maid of honor? I said yes. I threw her a bridal shower. I gave a speech at the rehearsal dinner about second chances and the unbreakable bond of sisters. Mom cried. Dad clapped me on the shoulder and said he was proud of how mature I'd become. The wedding was beautiful. Taylor looked radiant in ivory lace. I stood beside her at the altar, holding her bouquet, thinking maybe we'd turned a corner. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got an email from Ethan's account. The subject line read, "You deserve to know." Inside was a video file. I almost deleted it. Something about the phrasing felt off. But curiosity won. The video was from the bridal shower I'd thrown. The camera angle suggested it had been recorded secretly, probably on someone's phone propped up across the room. The timestamp showed it was from the gift opening portion of the afternoon. I watched myself hand Taylor a carefully wrapped box containing a vintage compass I'd found at an antique shop. "So you'll always find your way home," I'd said, thinking I was being sentimental. On the video, Taylor opened it, smiled for the camera, and set it aside. The video continued. After I left the room to get more champagne, Taylor leaned toward her bridesmaids. "God, could she be more pathetic?" Taylor's voice came through crystal clear. "Still trying to buy my affection with stupid gifts." One of the bridesmaids laughed. "I thought you two were close now?" "Please. I needed someone to plan this whole thing for free. My actual friends have jobs." Taylor picked up the compass, examining it with a sneer. She fell for the whole hospital sob story. Easiest manipulation of my life? You should have seen her face when I cried and apologized. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my laptop. The video continued. Taylor mimicked my voice, saying, "We can be better, start over," while her friends cackled. She described in detail how she'd faked the emotional breakthrough, practiced her tears in the mirror, calculated exactly how much contact would keep me hooked without requiring actual effort. "The maid of honor speech almost made me crack up," Taylor said, refilling her champagne. "All that garbage about unbreakable bonds. She actually believes we're going to be real sisters now." "What about after the wedding?" someone asked off camera. Taylor shrugged. "Ghost her, probably. I got what I needed. Free planning, free labor, and Mom and Dad think I'm some kind of saint for reconnecting with her. Win-win." The video ended. I sat in the dark of my apartment, watching it 3 more times. Each viewing made my chest tighter, but not from asthma. The attached police report showed exactly what the anonymous sender had described. No evidence of another vehicle. Officers' notes indicating Taylor's story was inconsistent with the physical evidence. Her statement claiming a truck ran her off the road when witness observations suggested distracted driving. For 3 days, I did nothing. Went to work. Came home. Stared at my ceiling. The hurt was enormous, but underneath it, something else was growing. Something cold and patient. I didn't confront Taylor. I didn't tell our parents. I responded to her texts with the same friendly warmth I'd been using for months. When she called to tell me about her honeymoon in Greece, I made all the right sounds of excitement. "We should get dinner when I'm back," she said. "I missed you." "Absolutely. I missed you too." The lie tasted like metal, but I swallowed it down. I spent the next 18 months building my case. Not a legal case, though it would become that. An evidence file. The first person I contacted was Mrs. Angela Carmichael, our next-door neighbor from when I was in high school. She'd always been kind to me, offering cookies and a listening ear when I'd show up on her porch looking for an escape. "I always wondered what happened to you," she said when I called. "You just disappeared after graduation." "I had to get out," I told her. "Mrs. Carmichael, do you remember anything unusual about my family dynamics?" There was a long pause. "Honey, I remember plenty. Your sister used to scream at you in the driveway. Your parents never intervened. One time I saw you sitting on the curb crying, and when I asked if you were okay, you said you just failed a test. But I checked with your mother later, trying to be helpful, and she said you'd gotten a 98%. You were crying over a near-perfect score. Would you be willing to write down what you remember?" "Absolutely. That child needed someone to speak up for her. Better late than never." Her statement arrived a week later, 3 pages of detailed observations spanning 5 years. She remembered the time Taylor had accidentally locked me out of the house in December while our parents were at a holiday party. I'd waited on the porch for 2 hours in freezing temperatures, too afraid to call anyone because Taylor had threatened to tell our parents I'd snuck out if I made a fuss. Mrs. Carmichael had finally noticed me and brought me inside her house, wrapping me in blankets and making hot chocolate while I shivered. Next, I reached out to my high school guidance counselor, Dr. Raymond Walsh. He was retired now, living in Florida, but he remembered me immediately. "Veronica Hayes," he said warmly. "One of the brightest students I ever advised. How are you doing?" "Better now than I was then. Dr. Walsh, I need to request my counseling records from high school. There's a legal matter I'm pursuing." His tone shifted. "Does this have to do with your home situation? I always suspected something was wrong, but you were so guarded. Whenever I tried to dig deeper, you'd shut down completely. I was terrified of making things worse at home. I documented my concerns. Multiple times. I even called your parents in for a meeting once, remember?" I did remember. Taylor had destroyed my science fair project the night before the competition, cutting my display board into pieces and pouring juice over my research notes. I'd shown up to school with red eyes and trembling hands. Dr. Walsh had pulled me aside, and I'd broken down crying in his office. The meeting with my parents had been a disaster. They'd sat across from Dr. Walsh, nodding sympathetically as he expressed concern about my emotional state. Then they'd blamed me for being too sensitive, too dramatic, too incapable of handling normal sibling rivalry. Taylor had come home from school that day and whispered in my ear, "Nice try. They'll never believe you over me." She'd been right. The records arrived from the school district after I filed the proper request. Dr. Walsh had been meticulous. Every meeting was documented. Every concern noted. Every deflection from my parents recorded. There were entries I didn't even remember, instances where teachers had reported that I seemed anxious or withdrawn, that my grades would mysteriously drop after parent-teacher conferences where Taylor's behavior was mentioned. I found my old pediatrician next. Dr. Harold Brennan had retired, but his practice had kept all records digitally. The file was extensive. Annual checkups, asthma diagnoses and medication adjustments, vaccinations, and then the notes that made my stomach turn. Patient reluctant to discuss source of bruising on upper arms. States she fell but avoids eye contact. Bruises appear consistent with gripping. Flagged for follow-up. Patient's mother states Veronica is clumsy and always hurting herself. Patient becomes very quiet when mother speaks. Concerning. Discussed asthma management plan with patient and parents. Patient seems fearful about keeping inhaler accessible. When asked why, father interrupted and changed subject. Dr. Brennan had tried. He documented everything? But without proof or a direct disclosure from me, his hands had been tied. Tracking down classmates was harder. People move on, change names, disappear from social media. But I was patient. I started with a yearbook, cross-referencing names with LinkedIn and Facebook profiles. Jessica Warren had been in my English class senior year. We'd worked on a group project together. She agreed to meet me for coffee. "I always felt bad about how Taylor treated you," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "But I didn't know what to do. We were just kids. Do you remember specific incidents?" "God, yes. The time she told everyone you cheated on the SATs because there was no way someone like you could score higher than her. The rumor spread like wildfire. You were called into the principal's office, remember? They investigated for weeks before clearing you. I'd forgotten about that. Or maybe I buried it. The humiliation of sitting across from Principal Davidson while he asked me pointed questions about my study habits, my integrity, my character. Taylor had started the rumor and then played the concerned sister, telling anyone who would listen how worried she was about me, how the pressure might have gotten to me. "I'll write it down," Jessica said. "All of it? Someone needs to hold her accountable." More statements came in. Lauren Phillips remembered the time Taylor had spread rumors that I had an eating disorder, telling everyone I was throwing up in the bathroom between classes. The school nurse had pulled me aside, concerned. The attention had been mortifying, especially since it wasn't true. I'd just been dealing with stress-induced nausea from living in constant anxiety. Marcus Rodriguez, who'd been in my chemistry class, recalled Taylor showing up at a party and telling everyone that I'd gotten drunk and made out with multiple guys the weekend before. I hadn't even been at that party. I'd been home studying. But the damage was done. The labels stuck. Desperate. Slutty. Liar. Each statement was notarized. Each person was willing to testify if needed. The pattern was undeniable. But the hardest part was going through my own belongings. The documentation I'd created without fully understanding why painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. My journals showed precise details I'd been afraid of misremembering. The calendars provided dates that corroborated other witnesses' accounts. The letter from my 15-year-old self was the most powerful piece of all, written in real time by someone living through the trauma. I hired a private investigator to look into the car accident. He found 3 witnesses who'd seen Taylor on her phone right before she crashed. Got their statements notarized. His name was George Kellerman, a former police detective who'd gone private after 30 years on the force. He came highly recommended, and when I explained what I needed, he didn't bat an eye. Insurance fraud cases are more common than people think, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. People lie about accidents all the time to avoid rate hikes or legal consequences. But you're saying your sister used the accident to manipulate you emotionally? That's exactly what I'm saying. George spent 3 weeks tracking down everyone who'd been near the accident scene. The police report listed no witnesses, but George knew better. Accidents on busy roads always had witnesses. People just didn't always stop. He found Maria Gonzalez, who'd been driving behind Taylor when the crash happened. I saw the whole thing, she told him in her statement. The girl in the silver sedan was texting. I could see her head down, looking at her phone. She drifted into the other lane, overcorrected, and went off the road into the ditch. There was no other vehicle involved. I stopped to help, but by the time I got out of my car, other people were already calling 911. I gave my name to someone, but I guess it never made it into the report. Stephen Hughes had been walking his dog on the sidewalk when Taylor crashed. She was going way too fast for that stretch of road. I remember thinking she needed to slow down. Then I saw her looking down at something in her lap, probably her phone. Next thing I knew, she was spinning out. The third witness was a teenager named Kyle Morrison who'd been sitting at the bus stop. I literally watched her texting and driving. My mom always tells me not to do that, so I notice when other people do it. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Both hands off the wheel, typing away. George also obtained the original police report, the one filed at the scene before Taylor gave her official statement. The responding officer, Officer Kenneth Wright, had noted in his initial observations, driver claims another vehicle ran her off the road. No evidence of second vehicle. No paint transfer. No tire marks consistent with evasive maneuvers. Driver appeared disoriented but uninjured beyond minor cuts and bruising. Scene inconsistent with driver's account. But somehow, between that initial report and the official filing, the narrative had changed. Taylor's statement claimed a large pickup truck had swerved into her lane, forcing her off the road. The truck had driven away without stopping. She'd been helpless, a victim of a hit and run. Officer Wright retired last year, George told me. But I tracked him down. He remembers your sister's case. Said it bothered him that her story didn't match the evidence, but his supervisor closed it without further investigation. He's willing to testify that her account was inconsistent from the start. The insurance angle was even more damning. Taylor had claimed the accident wasn't her fault, which meant her insurance rates didn't increase. She'd also filed a claim for emotional distress and lost wages, receiving a settlement of $12,000. That's textbook fraud, George said. She knowingly provided false information to receive insurance benefits she wasn't entitled to. That's a felony in this state. All of this information went into the file. Every witness statement. Every discrepancy. Every lie. Most importantly, I went through every box in my childhood bedroom during a visit home while Taylor and our parents were out. I found journals. Old calendars where I'd marked bad days with tiny dots. A letter I'd written to myself at 15, describing in detail the daily humiliation and fear. The visit home was surreal. Mom had texted me asking if I wanted to come for Sunday dinner. Taylor and Ethan would be there, she'd said. It would be nice to have everyone together. I'd agreed, already planning what I needed to retrieve. The house looked the same. Same beige siding. Same oak tree in the front yard. Same porch where I'd spent countless hours trying to stay out of Taylor's way. But walking through the front door felt like stepping into a museum of my own trauma. Ronnie. Mom hugged me, smelling like the same lavender perfume she'd worn my entire childhood. I'm so glad you could make it. Taylor's going to be thrilled. I doubted that, but I smiled and nodded. Dinner was an exercise in restraint. Taylor played the perfect sister, asking about my job, complimenting my hair, laughing at Dad's terrible jokes. I matched her energy, smile for smile, knowing that soon enough the facade would crumble. I need to grab something from my old room, I said after we'd finished eating. Some books I wanted to read. Oh, honey, most of your things are in boxes in the attic now, Mom said apologetically. I've been using that room for my quilting projects. Perfect. The attic meant privacy. I climbed the narrow stairs, pulling the cord that turned on the single bare bulb. Boxes were stacked against the walls, labeled in Mom's neat handwriting. Veronica, high school. Veronica, childhood. Veronica, college. My entire life, packed away and forgotten. I started with the high school box. The journals were there, spiral-bound notebooks with cartoon characters on the covers. I'd written in them sporadically, usually after particularly bad days. Opening the first one made my hands shake. March 15th. Taylor told everyone at school that I stuffed my bra. Amanda and her friends laughed at me in the hallway. When I got home and tried to talk to Mom about it, she said I was being too sensitive. Taylor smiled at me across the dinner table like she'd won something. June 3rd. Got an A on my history final. Mr. Peters said it was the best essay he'd read in years. I was so happy, I told Taylor. She accidentally spilled soda all over it. The paper is ruined. Mom said these things happen and I should have made a copy. September 22nd. Taylor locked me in the basement for 3 hours. She told Mom and Dad I was at the library. I banged on the door until my hands hurt. When she finally let me out, she said if I told anyone, she'd say I was lying and they'd believe her. She's right. They always believe her. Page after page of pain. Years of documentation I'd done without even realizing it might one day matter. The calendars were in the childhood box. I'd started marking bad days with dots when I was 12, some primitive attempt to track patterns, to predict when Taylor would strike next. Some months were covered in dots. Others had only a few. But they were always there, a constellation of small traumas. And then I found the letter. It was in a sealed envelope tucked into a copy of The Great Gatsby. I'd forgotten about it completely. The envelope was addressed to future me in my teenage handwriting. I opened it carefully, the paper crackling with age. Dear future me, I'm writing this because I'm afraid I'll forget how bad it really is. I'm afraid that someday I'll look back and convince myself it wasn't that terrible, that I was being dramatic like they always say. But it is terrible. It's so terrible that I think about running away at least once a week. It's so terrible that sometimes I wish I would just disappear. Taylor hates me. I don't know why. I've tried to be a good sister. I've tried to stay out of her way. But nothing works. She finds new ways to hurt me, new ways to make me feel worthless. Mom and Dad don't care. They see what happens and they don't care. Sometimes I think they like Taylor more because she's easier. I'm the problem child because I react when she hurts me. I'm the dramatic one. I'm the sensitive one. Last week she pushed me down the stairs. Told Mom I tripped. I had bruises on my back for days. Yesterday she threw away my college application essays. All of them. I'd spent months working on them. She said it was an accident, that she thought they were scrap paper. I don't know how much more of this I can take. But I'm writing this down so that future me will remember. So that someday, when I'm out of here, I'll know that it was real. You survived this. That's something. Love, 15-year-old me. I sat on the dusty attic floor and cried. Not for me now, but for that girl who'd been so desperate to document her pain, so afraid of forgetting her own reality. She'd been right to write it down. Because I had started to forget. I'd started to tell myself maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe, no. The letter was proof. The journals were proof. The calendars were proof. I took pictures of everything with my phone. Then I carefully packed the journals, calendars, and letter into my bag. Evidence. Before I left the attic, I noticed one more box pushed into the corner. Veronica, miscellaneous. Inside were old school projects, report cards, and awards. Buried beneath everything else was a medal from the regional cross-country championship my junior year. I'd placed second. It had been one of the proudest moments of my life. I'd come home with a medal around my neck, breathless and happy. Taylor had looked at it and said, "Second place is just first, loser." Mom had agreed. Well, maybe next time you'll work harder and actually win. I'd put the medal in a drawer and never looked at it again. Now, holding it in the dim attic light, I felt a surge of anger so pure it almost scared me. I had worked hard. I had won. Just not first place, so it didn't count. I put the medal in my bag too. A reminder of everything they'd diminished. And I found something else. Something I'd forgotten about. In the back of my closet, under a pile of old stuffed animals, was a shoebox. Inside was a small digital camera I'd gotten for my 16th birthday. I'd barely used it, preferring my phone. I charged it. Scrolled through the files. There, buried among pictures of friends and school events, was a video I'd accidentally recorded. The date stamp read 2 days before the inhaler incident. In the video, Taylor stood in my room, going through my things. She found my inhaler in the nightstand drawer, held it up to the camera with a grin, and said, "Wonder what would happen if this just disappeared sometime." Bet she'd totally freak. She was talking to herself. Practicing. My hands trembled as I backed up the file to 3 separate hard drives. I took everything I'd collected to an attorney. Not just any attorney, but one who specialized in family law and had a reputation for taking on difficult cases. Melissa Pritchard looked over my evidence for 2 hours before speaking. "This is extensive," she said finally. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" I want them to face consequences. Real ones. Your sister is married now. Your parents are retired. The inhaler incident happened over a decade ago. The statute of limitations for personal injury has passed. What about the car accident? She committed fraud by lying on the police report and insurance claim. That was only about 2 years ago. Melissa's eyebrow raised. Now that's interesting. Insurance fraud has a longer statute of limitations in this state, usually 5 years. With these witness statements and the investigating officer's notes, we might have something. And the recent manipulation? The bridal shower video shows her admitting she orchestrated an elaborate scheme to exploit me for free labor. That's more current. We might be able to pursue a civil case for intentional infliction of emotional distress based on the recent manipulation, using the historical pattern to establish this wasn't an isolated incident but part of long-standing abusive behavior. I want to do both. Melissa leaned back in her chair. This will get ugly. Your entire family will turn on you. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Taylor's smirk as I gasped for air. My parents' indifference as I crawled across the floor. Yes. The legal process moved slowly. Melissa filed a civil suit against Taylor for intentional infliction of emotional distress, citing the wedding manipulation and bridal shower admissions as the primary basis, with a historical pattern of abuse as supporting evidence. She also provided the evidence of the false police report to the district attorney's office. For months, nothing seemed to happen. Then, 7 months after filing, I got a call from Melissa. The DA is moving forward with charges against Taylor for filing a false report and insurance fraud. There's going to be a preliminary hearing. My stomach flipped. When? 5 weeks. And here's the interesting part. The judge on the case is known for being extremely thorough. She's requested all evidence be submitted in advance, including video documentation. The preliminary hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. I sat in the courtroom, my attorney beside me. Across the aisle, Taylor sat with her lawyer, her face pale. Behind her, my parents whispered frantically. Ethan was notably absent. They tried to contact me dozens of times since the lawsuit was filed. I'd blocked their numbers. Judge Linda Morrison entered and we all rose. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Please be seated, she said, arranging papers on her bench. Before we begin the formal proceedings today, I've reviewed all submitted evidence in this case. Ms. Pritchard, Mr. Calhoun, she nodded to both attorneys, I believe it would be beneficial for context if we review some of the video documentation together. This is unusual for a preliminary hearing, but given the nature of the charges and the civil case running parallel, I want to ensure we have a complete picture. Taylor's lawyer stood. Your Honor, I'm not sure that's necessary at this stage. I've made my decision, Mr. Calhoun. Please sit down. The bailiff dimmed the lights. A screen lowered at the front of the courtroom. What we're about to watch, Judge Morrison said, is a compilation of video evidence submitted by the plaintiff. Some of it is quite disturbing. This will help establish the pattern of behavior relevant to both the fraud charges and the civil claim. The first video began playing. It was the one from my old camera, showing Taylor holding my inhaler and talking about making it disappear. I heard my mother gasp behind me. The video cut to the bridal shower footage. Taylor's mocking voice filled the courtroom. Her cruel laughter as she described manipulating me. The bridesmaid's encouragement. My father made a choking sound. Then came something I hadn't expected. Melissa had compiled security footage from the hospital during Taylor's accident recovery. It showed me arriving, exhausted and worried. Showed me spending hours by her bedside. Showed me helping her to the bathroom, bringing her food, reading to her. Cut to Taylor on her phone, texting someone. The screen was zoomed in enough to read the messages. She's driving down again. This is almost too easy. Such a sucker. The courtroom was silent except for the videos playing. Judge Morrison's face remained impassive. The final video was the hardest to watch. Melissa had found it on our old home security system, footage my parents apparently never deleted. It showed the night of the inhaler incident from the hallway camera. Me, collapsing to my knees. Taylor, dangling the inhaler. Her words, gasp, loser. My parents, walking in and doing nothing. Me, crawling across the floor, struggling to breathe. The video lingered on my parents' faces as they watched me suffer. Dad checking his watch. Mom taking a sip of wine. Taylor made a strangled noise beside her lawyer. The lights came back on. Judge Morrison removed her glasses, cleaning them slowly. Ms. Hayes, she said, looking at Taylor. Stand up, please. Taylor stood, her legs visibly shaking. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many disturbing things. What I just witnessed ranks among the worst. The judge's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. You withheld life-saving medication from your sister while she experienced a medical emergency. You were 14 years old, certainly old enough to understand the potential consequences of your actions. Your Honor, I was just a kid, Taylor started. You were old enough to plan it, Judge Morrison cut her off. The video shows premeditation. And your behavior didn't end there. You orchestrated an elaborate deception to exploit your sister's compassion, using a car accident caused by your own reckless behavior as the foundation for manipulation. Taylor's lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she shook him off. She's lying about half of this. The videos are taken out of context. Sit down, Ms. Hayes. The judge's voice dropped 20 degrees. You will have your opportunity to speak during the formal proceedings. Right now, I'm going to address something I rarely address directly from the bench. She turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I cannot charge you with a crime for being neglectful parents. The law doesn't allow for that in cases like these. But I want you to know that what I saw on that video is unconscionable. Your daughter was in medical distress, and you treated it like a minor inconvenience. My mother started crying. Dad put his arm around her. You enabled a pattern of abuse that has caused lasting psychological damage to your older daughter. Whatever happens in these proceedings, I hope you both take a long, hard look at yourselves. Judge Morrison returned her attention to Taylor. As for the charges before me today, we'll be moving forward with a preliminary hearing. However, given the evidence of long-standing abuse and manipulation, I'm also ordering a full psychological evaluation for Ms. Hayes before we proceed. The court needs to understand whether this behavior represents an ongoing danger. This is insane, Taylor shouted, tears streaming down her face. She's making me look like a monster. No, Ms. Hayes. You did that yourself. The cameras simply documented it. Taylor's scream echoed through the courtroom. You don't understand. She was always the favorite. Always perfect. I had to do something to get their attention. Judge Morrison's expression didn't change. Attempting to harm your sister was your solution to feeling overlooked? I didn't mean to hurt her. I was young. You were young when you held her inhaler. You were an adult when you manipulated her into planning your wedding. You were an adult when you laughed about it with your friends. At what age, Ms. Hayes, were you planning to take responsibility? Taylor had no answer. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. The hearing proceeded. Testimony was given. Witnesses were called. My old guidance counselor described her concerns about my home life. The hospital doctor who treated Taylor explained how my sister's injuries were inconsistent with her reported version of the accident. The proceedings took most of the day. By the end, Judge Morrison had heard enough to bind Taylor over for trial on the fraud charges and allowed the civil case to move forward. 3 months later, facing overwhelming evidence, Taylor's lawyer advised her to accept a plea deal on the criminal charges. She received 18 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and had to pay restitution to the insurance company totaling $14,000. The civil case took longer. Eventually, 9 months after the criminal case concluded, Taylor's lawyer advised her to settle. She paid me a sum that covered my therapy costs, my legal fees, and enough extra that I could take a year off work to focus on healing. During the settlement negotiations, Ethan had filed for divorce. He'd been cooperative with the investigation, providing access to shared devices and confirming timelines. The bridal shower video had apparently been the final straw in a marriage already strained by Taylor's behavior. My parents tried to reconcile. They sent letters. Showed up at my apartment. Begged me to forgive them. I met with them once, 6 months after the trial. We sat in a coffee shop downtown. We didn't know it was that bad, Mom said, her hands wrapped around a cup she didn't drink from. You watched me struggle to breathe on the floor of our dining room. You knew. We thought you were being dramatic, Dad said quietly. Taylor was always so charming, so you believed her over me. Every single time. They had no response to that. I don't hate you, I told them. But I don't want you in my life anymore. You had 18 years to protect me, and you chose not to. That's not something I can forgive. I left them sitting there. It was the last time we spoke. Taylor sends me emails sometimes. I don't open them, but I can see the subject lines. I'm sorry. Please talk to me. I've changed. Maybe she has. People can change. But I'm not obligated to witness it. Some of the courtroom proceedings became public record, though Judge Morrison had sealed the most sensitive portions involving my childhood. Still, enough details emerged that local news outlets covered the story. Some people online thought I was vindictive. Others thought I was brave. I tried not to read the comments. What mattered was that I'd finally been heard. The truth was out there, documented and undeniable. I still have the compass Taylor threw away after the bridal shower. One of her former bridesmaids found it and mailed it to me with an apology letter. I keep it on my desk, a reminder that I found my own way home. Not to the house where I grew up, but to a place where I'm safe and valued. Some people think revenge is petty. Maybe they're right. But there's a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is burning down someone's house because they hurt you. Justice is making sure they face consequences for their actions. I didn't want to destroy Taylor's life. I wanted her to acknowledge what she'd done. The legal system forced that acknowledgement in a way that years of family therapy never could. 4 years have passed since the settlement. I built a good life. I have friends who would never withhold an inhaler or mock my pain. I have a therapist who's helped me understand that what happened wasn't normal, wasn't acceptable, and definitely wasn't my fault. Last week, I got a letter from Judge Morrison. She's retired now. The letter was brief. Dear Miss Plaintiff, I wanted you to know that your case has stayed with me. It reminded me why I became a judge in the first place. Sometimes the system works. Sometimes the truth matters. Thank you for your courage. Wishing you peace and happiness. Judge Linda Morrison. I framed it. People ask me sometimes if I regret pursuing the case. If I wish I'd just moved on and forgotten about it. The answer is simple. I tried moving on. I tried for years. But healing doesn't come from pretending wounds don't exist. It comes from cleaning them out, no matter how much it hurts. Taylor lost her marriage, her reputation, and her self-image as the golden child. My parents lost both daughters in different ways. I lost the family I'd always hoped to have. But I gained something more valuable. I gained myself back. On particularly hard days, I think about that 17-year-old girl gasping for air on the dining room floor. I think about how alone she felt. How worthless. I wish I could go back and tell her that 8 years later, she'd be okay. More than okay. She'd be strong and whole and free. That girl couldn't breathe because her sister stole her inhaler. This woman breathes just fine on her own. And that makes all the difference.